Welcome to Skills of the Future, a podcast by Perennial Talent. In this mini-series, we explore the skills and competencies needed to face the new realities of work.
Welcome to our Skills of the Future podcast, and our theme for this series is HR Game Changer Skills and Competencies Needed to Face the New Realities of Work. My name is Christine Lamothe. I'm president of Perennial Talent, a competency-based talent management solutions company. And my guest today is Jack Norman. Hi, Jack.
Hi, Christine. Great to see you again.
You too. So Jack is the Director of Talent Management at Catholic Relief Services, a wonderful international company that has helped millions of people. And Jack manages a team that supports recruitment, fellowships, internship, staff learning and development, as well as programs for emerging and enterprise leaders. Jack has worked in the fields of education, international development, and human resources with a focus on helping people realize their full potential. Jack started his career as a classroom teacher right here in Canada, fellow Canadian. Following some volunteer work overseas, Jack made a career shift and began managing people in programs in Somalia, Rwanda, Eritrea, Pakistan, Uganda, and then you returned to the United States with a focus on talent management. It's such a pleasure to have you on our podcast today, Jack. So how are you surviving this pandemic and everything that's going on right now?
Yeah, well, like everyone else, the world has sort of been changed upside down. You know, it's amazing how resilient people are, and we look backwards and see that people have just figured out how to adopt to this, what they call the new normal. So like everyone else, we figured it out, and I work from home. We juggle rooms. You know, whose call or meeting has the greatest priority gets the study, and you know, we'll work down from there. So.
Gosh, it's just changed. I had an employee who called me a few weeks ago, and she was going crazy working in her condo with her husband and two young kids. And she said, I'm biting the bullet. We're selling the condo. And she had bought, they bought a house just for the space, because she feels the new norm for her is probably going to be a lot of that continuing to work at home. And she did that, or they did that for their mental health, you know, sanity with their kids. So how has the world of work changed? What's been the impact of more employees working remotely, Jack, at Catholic Relief Services?
Yeah, good question. So, you know, I would say in some ways, my first thought is that everything and nothing has changed. So on one hand, we see our work has changed completely. So how people prepare for the day, how they organize their day, you know, the subtraction of the commute has really changed people. How we communicate, how we collaborate with colleagues, that's been a big challenge. People, you know, what was Zoom 6 months ago? It was something on your camera, you know, and now it's something everyone goes on to every day. So this has obviously resulted for us in an explosion of online meetings out of necessity, and collaboration tools. So people trying to now understand, how do we work when we can't be in the same room? Interesting. I wouldn't say this just for CRS, but I would say in general, and I've read lots of articles about this, it's changed power dynamics. You know, people who say extroverts and introverts, you know, the role how you show up in a meeting and how you look and how you interact with others. Some ways you could say that the Skype meeting has kind of democratized that a little bit, if everyone has their cameras on, you know. So that's another thing too, is the protocols that companies choose to engage to keep their employees engaged. Meanwhile, I think it's created greater disparities in some cases. So people without internet access, again, we work around the world. So that really made it very difficult for some people, almost impossible in a lot of the countries where we serve, to be able to work from home. It was just not an option, especially when we have, staff who might have their family and extended family living in the same household. Gets pretty crowded and pretty crazy. So, but, on the other hand, I would say that, our company mission, mandate, goal, nothing's changed. And I would say that most people are still spending most of their days in meetings and answering emails. So in some ways, nothing's changed. I would say that, there's definitely been an impact on employees around stress levels. I really see it with some of my colleagues with younger children, the challenge of trying to balance daycare, people telling me that, their child is being told they need to sit in front of a screen for 3 hours a day, that this is very counterintuitive to be telling a 3-year-old.
That's right.
Work-life balance was a challenge before, but it was also kind of split or bifurcated by the commute, as we were talking about earlier. So, people could start and end their work days more clearly. For a lot of people, it's all blended together and it's confusing. So, I joke that, in the past, people at work might have gone into the bathroom to hide from work. Now I've heard of people who at home go into the bathroom at home to hide from their children so they can get work done. So it's changed things.
It has. I had a Zoom meeting with someone who was doing it in their car because the children just hunt them down. So they have to organize like shifts. You take care of the kids from this time to this time, and knowing the kids would barge in, that was the only place they could.
And so at CRS, what we did is we just very quickly, once we shifted everyone to home, including both exempt and non-exempt staff. So we just set up protocols around helping people whose positions wouldn't normally allow them to ever telework, and just said, in compliance with labor restrictions around exempts and non-exempts, then we just made sure that the managers were checking in, making sure they weren't working more than they were supposed to. So if they were paid hourly, that there was lots of checks to make sure that they were able to maintain that integrity of the hours that they need to respect and work. And then meanwhile, excuse me, for those for the exempt staff, then there was the ability to go to a flex time. So, and we just opened it wide up and we said, look, you've got 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and you have X amount of hours that you need to book your work. And so that gave a lot of people, especially with children, a lot of freedom to choose to work early in the mornings, in the evenings, on a weekend, and they were able to balance both. And then meanwhile, we also set up a curbside service. So we said we recognized that people needed some of their, their mouse, their keypad, their extra monitor, their stand-up desk. So just to, again, respect the restrictions around COVID, then people were able to make a booking, and then they would just pull up, and the facility staff that did stay in the building would go up and find things for them. Sometimes just with a camera saying, okay, can you go into my third drawer? I've got this thing. And they just, and they were able to get everything they need without having to go in the building, and just made it working at home a little easier. And then on the mental health side, I think we recognized that people were getting stressed. So there was webinars on COVID, just getting the basics and the understanding. But then there was wellness seminars, how to juggle family life, how to prioritize these things, just things that were emerging as bubbling up as topics. And then we also kind of doubled down on the support services that were available for people for counseling that were really just stressing. Because, apart from work and family, you had people who actually had family who had contacted COVID, or a grandparent that was in a nursing home and now couldn't be seen or visited. So there was just a lot of, especially in the early days, a lot of extra stresses that we want to make sure that people we're addressing the whole person and making sure that they were feeling that we were caring for all those different components and setting them up for success for work still. So.
Wow, that's amazing because you have a huge organization and it's not just in the United States, as you said, it's around the world and different cultures and different, yeah, that I bet you were super busy. So thinking of the talent life cycle, in terms of hiring, learning, development, career pathing, what's been the biggest need or greatest changes that you've seen, within your organization, and are there any areas or role where this has been especially salient, Jack?
Yeah, as you mentioned, so CRS works in over 100 countries around the world. So the majority of our staff work in the countries where we serve. These are usually the least developed countries around the world, and that's where most of our staff are. And on, their average day is going to the field, which is going out to the villages and doing assessments. It could be a food security, it could be water, it could be agriculture, could be health, education. So these are all the sectors we work in around the world. Country by country, it varies. So, talent management and talent development was already complex and complicated, and this has certainly made it a bigger challenge. But I would say, walking through the different cycles of the talent process. So we already were recruiting all over the world. So for recruiters, I think it's been pretty seamless, to be honest. I think the biggest challenge has been onboarding, or one of the biggest challenges. So, okay, you're hiring people, and now, onboarding is a lot about understanding the culture, really getting acclimatized. Who are these people? And making sure that there's kind of that stickiness, that they really can start off well. And that's a challenge when they can't interact with anyone other than by video. So, but the teams worked well, creating lots of virtual engagements, opportunities for people to meet a lot more people than maybe they could have if they had just been in a non-virtual setting. So I think they found ways to pivot around that. They, like many organizations, CRS has been creative in creating virtual happy hours, virtual talent shows, virtual Halloween parties, anything that they can do to kind of emulate that water cooler effect, I think has been important for the engagement side. I think in the learning space, there was this huge, obviously immediate pivot to virtual learning. I will admit that for my team and I, that was actually a kind of a blessing in disguise, because sometimes, when you have a lot of training going on, you do have a lot of people doing face-to-face training, maybe the same way they've always done it. And all of a sudden when the virtual hit, it's like they had to take a step back and say, okay, how do we do this effectively in this new environment? We're missing the control mechanisms we're used to. So the team put together something they called Virtual Con, which was really just a celebration, an event, a learning event that allowed people to come in and learn different tools, tactics, ideas, like you would if you went to a big conference, but in a very condensed space on topics related to hosting and supporting virtual learning. So that was really successful, very well attended. I think that, still the big challenge is how do we measure success? So, we're starting to ask all the right questions because people need to. So you can have an event, but how do we measure the impact and the success? And it can't just be about smiley faces, like, what did you think of the day? So, it comes back to something you and I have talked about a lot over the years, which is competence and capabilities, and really having those standardized expected knowledge, skills, behaviors that you can maybe use as a pre-test. You can do 360 assessments and get that feedback and start to see if you're kind of moving the needle as a result of some of your interventions. So I think in terms of like things like career pathing, I think for us, it's too early to tell how this is going to affect people. I have heard of organizations where, again, there's a little bit of a split with a sense that there's the people in the office and there's the other people, and maybe the other people in the office are going to have a leg up because they're going to get that face time. So I think for companies that do this split, they're going to have to be very creative to ensure that they keep the playing field level and there's equal engagement, exposure, and opportunities for people regardless of where they're working from.
That's an excellent point.
Yeah, and I think for our management and leadership, I think we've just had to tweak a little bit, making sure, obviously a big part of managing virtually is there's probably been more emphasis on checking in and intentional checking in. So, people might have just kind of passed somebody by in the office, said, "Hey, how you doing?" Which was in some ways created more opportunity, but it might have also allowed them to not be intentional about the interaction. So, when you set up a Skype meeting, it just forces a little bit more rigor standard. So you can obviously say, "Hey, how's it going, Jack? How are you handling?" But then, you can get more quickly into the meat of the matter, which is, focusing on those goals, those objectives. How do we know people are being productive? Well, we need to be super clear on what productivity looks like. And it comes back to our SMART goals and making sure that people are really clear on what's expected of them in this new virtual environment. But again, we work a lot with knowledge workers. And so I think the idea in this new paradigm, which was emerging before COVID, but sort of precipitated by COVID, is that people, knowledge workers are basically saying, "Look, just tell me what you need to do. Tell me what the output is. I don't need you to tell me how to get there. I can figure that out. That's why you hired me." So a lot more emphasis on that more macro, and for managers and leaders to kind of point the vision, set the framework, the expectations, and then just trust that your staff are committed and pointed in the right direction and, want to be successful at what they're doing too. So.
Well, this is a good segue to my next question. In terms of the skills or competencies that you feel right now are most important, for your organization, and, some of the challenges too that organizations have had. You've talked a bit in terms of what you're doing right now to developing, some of those skills. But what are some of the critical skills do you think are emerging right now?
Yeah, I think, these are skills that were pretty important before, but now they've become critical skills. So, the big obvious ones are listening skills, and part of the listening skills is asking the right questions. So, we're doing kind of doubling down on our coaching questions and preparing managers to be better coaches. So less about instructing people how to do something, but asking the right questions that ascertains whether the people actually understand it. Same thing, influencing without authority. So, as I said earlier, sometimes there was power dynamics of just having somebody in a room. Maybe somebody's in an office where they all jumped to the office and closed all their web pages because the boss was walking by, but then went back to whatever when the boss left. They now have the freedom to do that all day. So what you need is a manager to be able to exert influence without necessarily having that authority, and in this case, the physical presence there. How do you ensure people maintain engagement, keep to expectations, keep working, basically, whether you're kind of watching them or not? So I think for some managers, that's a bit more of a challenge. Collaboration, huge. So that used to happen informally, and now it needs to be kind of almost forced or created. I certainly encourage my team to work on, expect one of their goals at least to be with somebody else. So it's a joint goal. They have to, so there's that forced collaboration where they're going to have to meet and check in with somebody on a regular basis to be successful in achieving their goals. Flexibility is huge, obviously, both from the manager side. And, sometimes it's that, something comes up and somebody said, "Look, I was supposed to be ready, but this happened at the house and my husband and my wife." And so there just needs to be a great deal of flexibility right now to help people manage the crisis. And then I think an element of innovation, what people did before might not be what they need to do now. And so how could we do things better, differently in this new context, I think is another key skill that people need to really be honing. And yeah, and these, I said, these were important before, and I think they're even more important now. So.
Because it varies, we had talked about that before we started the podcast. It varies in a lot of industries in terms of some of the skills that are emerging or the situations. Some people are being asked, to do more with less because downsize, their organization. But what are the future threats or pain points if organizations don't take the time, Jack, to clearly define the skills needed for success? Because as you said, things are changing. What could go wrong, if these are not properly addressed?
Yeah, I think that's, it's one of these things where hindsight will be 2020, but so I think some companies won't know until after the fact, maybe till it's too late. But I think one example that's really been just almost comical is the workplace design. So I would say that, ironically, for the last 10 years, companies have worked at tearing down walls, creating common workspaces, forcing people to work together, interact, for the under the guise of increased collaboration, communication, and now every one of those interventions is almost seen as was misguided. Like people are like, wow, I wish we had our cubes back. It'd be much safer in the office if we had our walls. And so I think that's one of those things where, wow, who could have predicted? So I think for companies to really think through what would work be like, what will our customers, what will our clients, what will our work model be like in 10 years from now, if indeed we're doing mostly the same? What if we were in this lockdown? And so it'll be transformative for them to be ahead of the curve. I think another area that's really where the threat or pain point was on this war for talent. So I think the ground shifted a little bit. So some companies were beginning to offer telework. I think now it's wide open. Everyone's doing that. And you will lose the war on talent if you don't demonstrate incredible flexibility in this time. So, companies are saying, look, you want to work from anywhere, Canada or anywhere America, that's fine with us. And so I think that's companies need to figure out that the bar has been raised. People entering the workforce are going to expect the same level or more in terms of flexibility of where they work, how they work, and when they work. And I'm not convinced that we're going to unpack that even if there was a vaccine tomorrow. I think people have become empowered and liking this new model. And I've heard it referred to like a knowledge revolution 2.0. And just like things like the Industrial Revolution, there was a time how things happened before and how everything happened after, and you don't go backwards to it. So
you're absolutely right, because companies need to start thinking about what you just said. What actions can they do to mitigate these threats? Because as you said, one of them, if they don't show that kind of flexibility, then you might lose some valuable talent.
Yep.
Any thoughts on that in terms of other ways, that companies could mitigate these particular threats?
I think too, you're going to run into, I think of, I think it was Daniel Pink that talked about mastery and autonomy and productivity. So the point is that people want to feel like they're making a difference, that their career's moving forward, that they're a value. One danger in working from home and people becoming socially disconnected is you run the risk of them being disconnected from your mission or your mandate, your brand identity, and even their sense of purpose. For some people, that purpose came from getting their work clothes on and going to the office, pick up their briefcase or whatever their signal was. So I think companies need to be mindful of what is it that people need in this new environment to keep their staff engaged and really aligned and feeling like they're contributing to that bigger picture, even though they can't see, all they see in front of them is the dining room table. So
that's a really good point. That's a really good point. It's interesting. I was speaking to a client yesterday, and they were saying in their industry, in the company she's working, more women now are deciding to stay home. It's like there's been a shift, or people who are opting for an earlier retirement. So there's like a change going about in our workforce that I don't think we could have foreseen that, a year ago, So how companies now have to think ahead to retain. You talked about onboarding, but now like retention as well might become a real issue.
That's right. Yeah, and maybe less so in Canada, but I've mainly been referring to the changes that have been brought on by COVID. But at the same time, we also have an incredible year, a threshold year, where a lot of the race equity issues have come to the forefront. And so again, I think people, apart from COVID, are expecting, demanding their employers show up differently, act differently, promote differently, develop differently than they have in the past. And I think it's an exciting opportunity, but I think, a lot of companies are still wrestling with how to do this in a way that is, is transparent, is fair, is competitive, is all those things. No one wants to see a pendulum swing where your companies are thinking that diversity is just something about the way people look. It's really about, to me, a lot of it's about bringing the different ideas and mindsets and backgrounds and behaviors and thoughts and ideas and visions together in the same room, and the creative energy that comes from having people of with those differences come together and forge a new path forward, to avoid that kind of oneness in thinking. So that's an exciting challenge from a talent perspective. How do we help, how do we help our companies, our organizations, our managers create that diverse workplace that is not just diverse in an appearance, but it's both diverse in thinking and inclusive. And that comes to the retention question. So you can maybe invite people, but they need to feel that they're actively contributing. Otherwise, they're gonna leave and go elsewhere. So
exactly. Well said, Jack. Thank you so much for being our guest today.
Oh, I'm so honored to join you, and love the work you're doing. And I'll look forward to a follow-up chat in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you for your insight into the new realities of work. Bye, Jack.
Bye.